Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on marine engine rebuilding tips and info, part 2.
My name is Chris Hamann. I am the president, owner, whatever you want to call me, of Lakeland Auto Marine. This is part 2. If you saw part 1, great. Well, if not, you're stuck with part 2 with me again. So let's jump into Chrysler. All right. And I know not everybody probably does some Chryslers, but it seems around here the Chryslers are all over the place because a lot of older boats use Chrysler. Chrysler Marine was in business since the 1930s and through 1991. Okay, so there were a lot of them produced. So I want to go over some things, specifically rope rear main seals, because I know a lot of us struggle with that. Okay, and I've got some ideas and things that we do here. Okay, first thing I want to talk about is some differences. I want to talk about right-hand rotation and left-hand rotation. All right, right-hand rotation has a different intermediate gear. Okay, you see this, how the gear is the other way. Obviously the camshaft's different to accept this, but I also have a thrust collar, all right, to take, because that thrust is trying to push that distributor up. I can buy this intermediate gear all over the place, right? Milling shows them, not a problem. You will not find this gear. It's long gone. It's Chrysler Marine only, right hand. I get calls on this. I don't have any more left. I get calls on this. I'm not going to use the word frequently, but enough, where the engines went to an engine builder, right? The teardown guy, zip, 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 right? He throws this away. They build the engine right-hand rotation, whatever, and then all of a sudden they get a phone call and says, hey, I don't have my distributor gear. Oh, no problem, right? So you look this up in Milling's book or whoever you use, and you ship them this, and it won't go down all the way because the gear. Now what, right? Chrysler's out of business. I mean, Lee Iacocca, it's over, right? So, and in the marine world. So this, you better guard this with your life, okay? Big block is similar, but you've got the two different deck heights, okay? So if I've got a 400, which they did marinize, or the RB block or whatever, like a 440, I don't know the links off the top of my head, but that's a big deal, okay? So please pay attention to this. And here's my cheat sheet. Let's say I don't know anything, okay? And I want to know which way this engine rotates. Well, you see, this is the rear of the block. This is a pair of Chryslers, right? You see that thrust collar right here? That thrust collar right there tells me that's a right-hand rotation engine or opposite rotation, okay? This engine here with that distributor flush to the block, that's an automotive rotation or left-hand rotation. So when I get an engine in the shop and it's got this, I automatically know it's right-hand, assuming it ran, okay? So, and that's what I look at as an engine builder, right? Or as a mechanic. I'm looking for something quick that I can take my eyes and go, that's what that is, okay? And that's why I put this in here, because us as engine builders, sometimes we get tasked with that, right? We're supposed to know, all right? Or I'm building an engine, I don't know why I can't get the distributor to go down all the way or whatever. I need this thrust collar and I need that right here. See, it's got this raised portion in here. That is mission critical. I don't have it, I'm not going anywhere, all right? So 273, 318, 340 is a internally balanced engine, which means the flywheel is neutral balance, okay? This is 318, or excuse me, this is 360, okay? So 360, the oil pan's a little bit different, all right? It has a raised portion here on the rear up against the rear main cap, because, you know, obviously one of the differences of 360 is the bigger mains. I think, what, 2-inch 8, 3-inch 810, or yeah, 2-inch 810, I believe, instead of 2.5 on a 318 off the top of my head. And look at here, this flywheel, you can use the same cast number, but it's got this 1 7/8 hole here because it's externally balanced. And my harmonic balancer has a balancing weight, okay? This is kind of common. We get this, right? Nobody wants a 318. Everybody wants the biggest thing they can get, right? So it's the horsepower race. Everybody's like, oh, build me a 360, build me a 360. Well, basically what I'm telling you is you need this. If I'm building a Marine 360, I need to find this oil pan, and I need this balancer, and I need this flywheel. But these flywheels aren't easy to come by, trust me. So here's a drawing, okay? So this drawing right here, I can take a 318 flywheel and I can make it a 360. So it shows where that hole is, the size of the hole, 1 3/16, and so forth. So I put this in here. This was the original part number of the 360 flywheel. Again, Chrysler's out of business. You call up your Chevy dealer, excuse me, your Mopar dealer, you're not getting this. You know, you can call up the Chrysler places, you won't find this. Okay, like I say, this thing's been gone since '91, but I want to put this sheet in here because maybe it'll help somebody out someday. okay? And let's get to the elephant in the room, the rear main seal, all right? This is something that I constantly get asked about. Nobody wants to use rope. Everybody wants to use rubber. I get it. Rope sucks. I'm right there with you, okay? But there's a few things we got to know, all right? And I've had some success with some ropes, and that's what we're going to talk about here. So the first thing that I'm interested in a Chrysler and other engines, all right? I'm not talking about Interceptor, old Ford Y blocks and stuff like that. I know not everybody's doing all that stuff anymore, but there's a knurl, okay? And the knurl direction, okay? So later cranks I've seen don't have any knurl, all right? Obviously, when I say car here, that would be left-hand rotation, right? This crank is going this way. That knurl is going to shove the oil into the engine. And when I say marine here, that's opposite rotation. Again, the crankshaft is going this direction. That knurl is shoving the oil into the engine block, okay, not out. So this happens all the time. Okay, guy wants an opposite rotation engine or vice versa. They take an engine, they swap the cam, they do whatever, and they put it in and it leaks. Okay, so step one is what knurl, if I have a knurl, is the knurl correct? That's what I'm always interested in. And I'm specifically talking about 273, 318, 340. Okay, 360 originally had knurls too, but there's a workaround on that. I'll get to that in a second. All right, 360, I can use rubber both directions. But 318, 273, 340, I am stuck using rope, okay, with the correct knurl or no knurl, which I'll get to. All right, so this happens to be a brand new Eagle crankshaft that I just bought not too long ago. This is an engine we just built here probably about a month or so ago. All right, and you can see it's got this knurl in it. All right, and I want to use this for opposite rotation. Well, I know damn well if I put this in the engine, it's going to leak like a sieve. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grind that knurl off. All right, so I put in our Storm Vulcan crank grinder and I ground that knurl off. It takes about 5 to 7 thousandths off. No big deal, especially in rope, because one of the problems I see with rope is we get them too tight. And I got a slide coming up about that because it's tricky. Okay, because if I get it too tight, it can burn and it'll glaze and it's not going to seal. But I have had really good luck running no knurl with a rope seal. It's better than the wrong knurl. Okay, I don't have a way to put a knurl on. Maybe you do. If you do, again, shoot me an email. I don't know everything. Like I say, I'm not an expert. I'm just an enthusiast. Okay, so if you've got a way to put a knurl on this thing, please let me know. Okay, but anyway, I've been doing this for quite some time. It's worked very well for me. Okay, but I took that knurl off. All right, and this is the rear seal that I like to use. This is not a commercial. I'm not getting paid. This is just who I use. Best gasket. Okay, they're out in California. You got to buy everything. I don't think you can buy direct from them. You got to buy through a distributor. But you can go to their website and they'll point you to a distributor. I love this seal. This seal is awesome. All right. And when you open up the package, this is what you get. All right. They give you a knife. They give you this, looks like a nail file my wife would use and some other stuff. And, you know, and they give me some instructions. And I'm not going to read the instructions to it, but I just want to hit some highlights. So the first thing I do is I put this seal in the rear main bearing cap. Okay. And they've got this little thing here, looks like a broken nail file. And it just gives the right height. You know, because one of the things with rear seal rope is, you know, it's too easy to get it too tight. So if I have this guy right here, you know, if I can just trim that at the right height, that gives me a fighting chance that, you know, I don't have too much of this hanging out, you know, sticking up to really crush that seal and burn that. I mean, I've had these engines come in that crank's burned. You know, I've seen some discoloration to the rear main bearing, you know, because all this heat here, they got it way too tight. Okay. So I like that. Right. And I put grease on it. This is assembly grease, right? Nothing in this world is meant to go together dry as far as I'm concerned, right? Especially when it comes to sealings and stuff like this. So don't be afraid to put a little grease on there, right? Because especially when I start this thing up, there's no oil against there. I can have the best procedure in the world, right? I spent an hour doing it. I watched every YouTube video. I've done it 100 times or whatever. And when I cut this, just like that, okay, or excuse me, if I don't grease that, that's a problem, okay? Because now that thing could rip that and burn it maybe in the first few revolutions and it's game over. It's game over, okay? But here's my cheat sheet, okay? I use a rolling torque gauge, all right? And This is my way of doing it. So I have the front cover on. You can see I have the harmonic balancer, okay? And the timing chain's hooked up, all that stuff. So I'm running the cam, all that stuff. I go ahead and I take my rolling torque meter and I'm looking for 40 to 70 inch-pounds of rolling torque, all right? And you can see here on this engine, I'm about right at 60. I know my picture's blurry because I'm trying to take a picture and turn this at the same time. I'm not very coordinated, just ask my wife. And I want to get a capture of this because when I build these engines, this is what I'm looking for. This tells me, hey, Chris, I'm not too tight, not too tight, you know. And like I say, it's so easy to get these things too tight. And like I say, it can burn it. So that's Chris's spec. That's not in any book. That's just something I do. But here's what happens when it's too tight. Okay. Now this was an engine I just looked at maybe a month ago. Okay. Actually, since our part one. And one of the things I noticed is, look, now this engine came in. This is a Chrysler 360. All right. And it came in because it was leaking like a sieve. Now look at this. If this picture had noise, you could actually hear this crack. When I took that rear main bearing cap off, I could actually take that rear seal and it snapped like somebody's breaking your bones. And look how glazed and overheated that is. There's no way that's going to seal anything. It's got no chance. That thing burned up on re-entry. Like this, I mean, it was over. Okay. So, but this is a 360. I can use rubber as long as I make sure I have no knurl or the correct knurl. Okay. So, but this is what happens when it gets too tight. You know, it's very common. Like I say, you can see all the stalactites and everything just hanging off there. This thing was just freaking Chernobyl. Okay. Now, this is a homeboy hookup right here. Okay. If you can go on eBay, if I don't beat you to it, haha. Okay. This part number right here, 354.93.92. For a very, very short time, Chrysler made a rear main seal with the small main, 2.5 mains, 360, or excuse me, 318, 273, 340, that had no serration in it. Okay, the Felpro rear main seal and all the aftermarket ones I've seen all have serrations. But if you call your Chrysler dealer up and give them that number, it's going to update 20 times and give you the wrong seal. But this seal right here, it's got to be this number, and it's got to be in an old scraggly box or an old scraggly bag. Okay, look at this seal. There's absolutely no serrations in it. Nothing, right? That means I could cut my knurl off, use this 40-year-old rear seal that's still good, and I'm golden. Okay, I'm golden. All right. So if you go out there on eBay, if I don't beat you to it, because trust me, I got a safe search on these. I buy every one I can get my hands. I probably shouldn't have told you that because now you're going to buy them all, but it doesn't matter. I'm here to help you guys. Trust me. But this seal right here is money in the bank if you can find one. I've only seen a couple marine engines come in with it, but they were only made like, from what I can tell, like 1976, 1979, something like that. And like I say, they update them years later and they're gone. But like I say, don't waste your time calling the Chrysler dealer because he's going to send you a seal that's been updated 100 times. It's going to have serrations, but this is what you're looking for. Okay. And you can use that any rotation. And again, I want to make this statement, which I got it coming up anyway. Left hand or automotive rotation, I can use the rubber seal, provided I have the correct knurl or no knurl. I could use that old school seal if I can find one with the correct knurl or no knurl on 318, 340, and 273. Now earlier I showed you a 318 oil pan, or excuse me, a 360 oil pan. Well, the 318 oil pan has a groove where there's like a little rubber seal that goes in here on both sides. Okay, the 360 had a raised portion at the rear. You know, the bolt pattern, all that's the same. You know, you'll think, no problem. I can slam dunk that pan on there. Not so fast, you know. So just again, because the pan gaskets are the same. You know, the only difference is that seal over that rear main bearing cap. You know, on a 360, it uses the car rubber style. It goes right over top of the main cap. 318 is just a flat on the rear cap. Okay, now this is one good thing that came from our friends at Felpro. Okay, this is what I've been using the last few years because the 17150 set, the lower set, which did both 318, 273, 340, and 360. It came with a 360 rear seal, came with a chunk of rope, which I'm not using. I'm using the best, you know, but it comes with there. And I've been using these car sets. Well, the folks at Felpro reached out and says, hey, Chris, we're going to go ahead and reactivate this number. So how about that? So you know what? Coming up here this summer, they told me that this number is going to be available. So if you do a bunch of Chryslers or whatever, this number should be reactivated. So hats off, because we use a lot of these. So I was glad to hear that. But if not, or time being, this is what I'm doing. I'm using the car set on the bottom end, and I'll show you what I've been doing here. So this gasket here is for 1975 to 1991. If I have two V belts, one for the alternator and one for a recirculating pump, that's the gasket I use, okay? But if I've got an earlier engine, 1974 and back, I don't have a car recirculating or car style water pump on there. I've got a dual pocket raw pump, and this gasket is different. All right, it's blocked off here. It's not this, okay? So this is a problem, right? Because that gasket is included in the 17150 set. Hopefully the 17150 gets reactivated like they say, and we don't have to worry about this. But if not, you need to reach out to Marysville Marine here. They'll hook you up with a dealer, and you can buy this. That's the original Chrysler number, that 449-2300. Okay, so if you can't get a 17150 set and you don't feel like making one or using a bunch of blue silicone or whatever, this was the correct gasket. So that's important for 74 and prior. Okay. I know we're talking some older stuff here. I know we're jumping around and talking about brand new stuff and old stuff, but in our shop, this is what I see. So here's the cams. This happens to be Melling. Again, not a commercial for Melling. Elgin catalog only shows the automotive or left-hand rotation cam. Okay, E1578S, I believe off the top of my head. I could be wrong on that. Don't quote me. But Melling still offers a left and a right, 23103, 23104. I've been putting these in all our small block Chryslers for quite a while. I've had great luck with them. Okay, they've worked well. I don't roller convert them. It's, you know, like I said, I know this is not a lifter discussion, roller flat tap it. That's for another webinar and for somebody else way smarter than me. But I've used these with regular lifters, and I have not had a problem. Okay, so now that I said that, I probably just jinxed myself. But those are the cams that I use. Okay. The older engines, okay, the earlier Chrysler engines had a floating pickup screen, okay? So you can't buy this anymore, but you got to take a screwdriver and you got to pry this thing apart. If you take this to the solvent tank or the cleaning guy and he just sits there and washes this out with a brush or whatever, trust me, where this thing was open, it looked good. I pried this out, looks terrible, okay? So you've got to pry this thing out and you got to wash all this out. This is a floating screen. This is on a swivel, okay? So the newer engines, I think 77, 8, 9, something like that, it's a solid screen, but the earlier engines are a floating screen. And like I say, you can't buy this stuff, but you better clean it. You better make sure it's hospital clean, because how is that going to look on my fresh new motor? Not very good. Okay. The later engines used a windage tray, and the windage tray was marine only. All right. And what I want to talk about here is it's directional. And it's actually marked. So up here in the front, you can see this is the harmonic balancer end. It says, hey, Chris, front CCW. Well, that would be for right-hand rotation counterclockwise. That's going to wipe the oil off the crank. I can 180 this operation, okay? If I 180 it, that says front clockwise. So there's holes in the main caps and that bolts in there, okay? The older engines, I didn't see it, like late 60s, early 70s, I didn't see a windage tray. The oil pans were the same. And by the way, that oil pan, that cast aluminum oil pan, is only for a inboard engine. Chrysler, for many years, made their own, the Dana outdrive. They made a Dana 90. That used a car oil pan. It used a stamped steel pan. It was identical to a, whatever, 78 D150 truck or whatever. Okay, so the cast aluminum pan is what has the windage tray. All right, just to give you a, for instance. I know that I didn't have that on the slide, it's just something I just thought of. This is an interesting bulletin that AERA put out 100 years ago, all right? And it has to do with a plug. Now, I know there's probably a lot of expert Chrysler engine builders on here, but I just want to go over this. I'm not going to read this to you. You can look it up on your process, us AERA members. It's service bulletin number 53, so you can tell how long ago this was written, okay? But it's got to do about this plug right here. All right, and basically, the long and short of it is, if this plug's not here, I'm not forcing oil to my oil filter, right? I'll force oil bypass around it. And this is the plug. This is the rear main bearing cap. Now, I always knock these out. I'm sure a lot of us bake and blast or whatever, hot tank. I go in through the oil pressure sender hole and drive this guy out. While in the soft plug kits for Melling and Elgin and so forth, they don't include this plug in the kit. And if I'm the cleaning guy, right, and I'm not paying attention, maybe I don't see this plug, okay, I just want to make aware of it, okay. It's 9/16, okay, so 562, 9/16, and I just stuck a piece of wire, right? So this is oil coming from the oil pump, is forcing it right into here, assuming that plug is in there. It's going to force it to the oil filter, all right? And then here's a piece of rod here, okay? This is literally the exact same rod I use to drive that plug out, because that plug is located right there. And I got a better picture coming up here in a second. But I just want to show you that this goes right through. So in other words, if I don't put this plug in here, this oil is going to go right through the engine and not get filtered, all right, which is probably not what I want. So I got little colors here, right? So this arrow, the red arrow, indicates oil flow direction, okay? So oil is leaving the pump coming in here, right? My yellow line here is if my 9/16 plugs there, it's gonna force that oil to make a right-hand turn and go to my oil filter, right? And then my filtered oil, which is my green arrow, is gonna come in here and feed my galleys, okay? Again, will I have oil pressure without this plug? Yes, I will. Is my filter doing anything for me? Absolutely not, okay? So right there is coming through the bottom. I just want to show you what we had. Okay, coming up through the bottom, right through there. All right. I want to talk about these cooling tubes. We're going to jump to the cooling system now. This is another mistake I see constantly. Okay, and this is right out of an old school Chrysler Marine Service manual, and they're kind of vague about this. And if you look in here, there's a star. It says exhaust manifolds, and there's like this dashed line talking about this tube. And I highlighted this box, and it basically says, "Hey, Chris, this exhaust manifold water outlet tube must always be installed from the exhaust outlet end of the manifold." So that means if my exhaust hose is hooking up here, I got to be blowing water out of that. That tube's got to come in from that back side. Okay. Now, this happens to be a Bar catalog. To my knowledge, Bar is the only company making manifold stuff for Chryslers anymore. And when you order these new manifolds, right, because a lot of this stuff is 50, 60 years old, right, or 25, whatever, right, we order these manifolds, these tubes don't come in it. And if I'm the teardown guy, or if I'm the marina, and it's my first day on the job, right, I take this manifold off, and I see it's broken, cracked, so I go up and tell my boss, "Hey, boss, the manifold's junk. I ordered all this stuff up, and I don't put this tube in." Well, guess what? I'm going to have hot spots in that manifold. That tube is to get the air out of the top of that manifold. That's what it's there for, okay? And here they are. They're right here. This is one of the reasons why me personally, I like to take these manifolds apart. I take these manifolds apart, I bake them, I blast them, I paint them, I make sure all this stuff's good. I drive these tubes out. If the tubes, I can't get them out, a lot of times they corrode. I put new ones in, very important, very important. And here's an engine I'm building, okay? And hey, guess what? It's opposite rotation, right? Because it's got that collar there. But anyway, these tubes come in from the rear. So I know I don't have the end caps on here yet, but I just want to show you that where these tubes go in, they go in that hole right there. Very, very important. And the reason that's like that is a lot of these Chrysler manifolds, the early systems, the water comes in from the bottom. Well, that means I'd have a ton of air up here, which means this top side of this manifold is going to get way too hot. And when we talk about sea trials later on, if we get there, if not, we're going to do part 3. I'm going to show you on how you can figure this out, okay? And here's the other thing, which we're getting to, is I can have impeller blades stuck in here. That's why it's so important for the installer, or you, if you do everything like me, is take this stuff apart. If this stuff is 30 years old, 40 years old, 50, it could have blew impellers 25 years ago. There could be little itty bitty blades stuck in here. I've seen blades stuck in elbows. Another tip on Chrysler is this thermostat housing. The water comes in right here from the front. It is so common to get an impeller blade stuck in that outlet there that actually goes to this manifold, and you'll get one side that runs hotter than the other. And there's no temperature gauge on this manifold. The old engines in the 60s had 2 temp senders and were reported a 1 gauge, but everything 70, 71 and up doesn't have 2 senders that I've seen. So this manifold could be 240 degrees, and my water temp sender's up here. I'll never know it, right? That's why in the sea trial, I'm always putting my hands on these manifolds. I better be able to keep my hands on them on a non-catalyst engine, all right? Catalyst engine, a little bit different situation. But on an old school non-emissions controlled engine, I better be able to put my hands on that motor, on those manifolds. That is part of my sea trial procedure, which we're going to get to. Another common thing on Chrysler, this ring gear loves to walk off this flywheel. Okay, we do starters and alternators here in our shop. Okay, we're electrical rebuilding shop too, and I can't tell you how many times customer and marinas come in and say, I need a new starter for my Chrysler, it doesn't work, right? Well, what happens is they go out there zinging, you know. Well, the problem is this ring gear is this one still work, but they'll walk off towards the engine, and now that drive won't contact it. The reason I'm telling you this is I haven't really seen this on Chevy or Ford or anything else I've worked on, but I see it on Chrysler Marine religiously. So I'm bringing this up to you, the engine builder and or the teardown guy, right? Pay attention to this, right? I've seen guys press this back on and tack weld it. You can still buy new ring gears. Marysville Marine sells them. But you know, this is important, right? If I'm doing the engine, I'm balancing it, whatever, I'm making sure this ring gear is on here right. The reason I put this in here is, like I say, how many guys have seen a 350 Chevy ring gear fall? I mean, I haven't, you know, not that I can remember, but I see Chrysler small block only on Marine all the time. So always check this during an overhaul of a Chrysler V8 engine. Again, not a commercial, but I've used these. This is big block, okay? These folks here at Fast Fish Auto Parts. I don't know these guys. I talked to them on the phone once. I bought some of these seals. This is a one-piece rear main that you actually slice with a razor blade. I got a video on YouTube if you want to watch it. But anyway, this seal here, and it has no serration. So you know what that means? I can use it on either rotation, right? And you can go to their website, watch a video, whatever. But it's 80 bucks, not the cheapest thing in the world. But this is an alternative in that rope, okay? I've used this with great success. So I just want to put this out here. You can go to his website, Fast Fish Auto Parts. And like I said, I don't know this gentleman. Again, not a commercial, just something I use. But bottom line here as we wrap up our Chrysler discussion is here's all my tips, okay? I told you that 150, basically everything I just talked about for the last 25 minutes, it's right here, okay? For 218 or 273, 318, 340, I got to make sure I got the right knurl. I can use rubber if it's an automotive rotation engine. If it's a opposite rotation engine, if I get lucky on eBay, if I beat Chris to buying some old school seals, you can go that route with the correct knurl. If not, grind the knurl off or put a knurl on and use the rope from Best. That's Chris's opinion. Same thing applies to 440, 426, 383, the big stuff, right? The big block stuff that's got knurls, you got to pay attention to that, okay? 360. Okay, 360 only. The Felpro rear main seal has no serrations. That is good to go. That engine I showed you a few slides ago, I put a rubber seal in that, right? That engine was rebuilt by a very popular remanufacturing company. Not going to name them, got nothing to do with them, okay? But they probably just don't understand that you could probably use that that rubber rear seal, okay? So I pulled that rope out. It didn't have a knurl, and I just shoved a rubber right in there, and the guy's running it, right? I just fixed it not too long ago. But 360 is nice. I can use rubber both directions. I just want to make sure. Again, early the 318s and stuff, the early, excuse me, the 273, 318, 340 are internal balance, 360s external. I do want to touch on the intake manifold for a second. The 1967, when I say 67, the LA or LM series engines, not the poly, okay? 66 and back poly is a little bit different animal. But the 67 to 86, used a marine only intake manifold. It said marine right on it. It had like an 8-degree wedge built into it that is never used in a car, okay? And it used a Carter AFB. The last few years of Chrysler, 87 to 91, they used the actual Dodge truck manifold. So in 87 to, or even before that, 85, 6 or whatever to 91, I think you can get a Ram Charger or a D250 or something with a Quadrajet and a 360. It's that manifold. The EGR plate is blocked off. It's 100% a car. Okay, I didn't put chassis numbers in there. I'm just telling you this. And it used a Quadrajet carburetor. And the last note is Magnum series engines that I've never saw, 92 and up, were never marinized. It's only the older stuff that was. Okay. So let's jump into LS. So I'm just going to give you an overview. This is not an LS engine building class, okay, because I'm sure there's way better people out there than me doing them. But I just want to give you some highlights on what I've seen and what I know, okay? And I'm going to throw some cam numbers in there. So one thing I found out with the LS stuff so far is they are 100% right off the GM assembly line. okay? So when I say LQ4, you know, LY6, L96, L86, you know, some of you guys are probably very familiar with those RPO codes, okay? That's what we're talking about here, okay? So Crusader, to my knowledge, was the first to marinize them in 2003, late '03, all right? And there's some head casting numbers. It's got LQ Fuel 4, so it's got disc pistons that are press fit. It's got the old school cam trigger, and there's the camshaft number with some specs. Okay. I actually overhauled a pair of these this past winter in a 2003 Pursuit. All right, and this is this engine right here. This is an LQ4. This is a late '03, early '04 engine. Okay, but I want to mention something here. This looks like an LS car style or truck style water pump, right? It's got the same cast number, it's everything, right? And you're going to call up your marine supplier and they're going to say that water pump is $480 some, and you're going to go like that, right? That's what you're going to want. You're going to want to hang up the phone, all right? But if you hang up that phone, you're going to have a bunch of pain, trust me. They modify this pump, all right? And maybe if you want to modify it, I'm going to show you what's different on it, all right? But there's a couple things they do is they drill this top piece out. They used to have a press-in tube for a heater hose, all right? And they put this little guy in here, all right? And that's a disbursement tube to go to the exhaust manifolds, all right? And the water temp sender for the gauge is right here, okay? So on these early engines, Miffy, they didn't use the coolant temp sensor like a truck would. This still does have a coolant temp sensor in the driver's side left-hand bank or port if it's not a V-drive cylinder head, okay? The computer uses that, but it has a traditional 100 to 240 ohm Teleflex style water sensor right here, okay? So it's located in that water pump. So again, if I go to AutoZone and buy a $29 pump, I don't have this, okay? Here's the other thing. Where the thermostat will go in a Chevy truck, right? They have a 30 millimeter brass freeze plug drove in here, okay? Because they don't put the thermostat here. They reroute this thing, all right? And that's what's different. If I bolt that car water pump, tear down guy rips this, throws it in a box, right? Or the marina or the engine installer, right? He calls up wherever and he gets that price on that water pump that's almost $500. He's gonna, you know, everybody's an expert, right? They're gonna like, look at that. That's the same thing. Look up a 2003 Chevy Silverado 1500 and order it, right? And you put that on there and they wonder why it overheats or I'm losing antifreeze, right? They're gonna call you up and go, hey, your engine, I put 4 gallons of antifreeze and it's going right out the back door. What's going on? Or why is this thing overheating, right? So I just want you to be aware of this, all right? And here's what the thermostat is, all right? The thermostat is on a heat exchanger. These engines are, everyone I've seen is closed cool, okay? And I'm getting to that, what that means. It uses, the system is sealed with antifreeze except a couple pieces, the riser and so forth. But this thermostat, this is a heat exchanger, all right? And this is basically the radiator. It's a water to water exchanger, right? So lake water is circulating outside this. The hot coolant or antifreeze is circulating inside this, and that's dissipating the heat, all right? But this thermostat goes in what you would call upside down into this, and it's just held on by 2 hose clamps, right? I got like a 2-inch hose here, 2 1/4 hose that goes over this and clamps down. So this is where the thermostat is, right? So you would think, oh yeah, Chris, this is where the thermostat is. You know, it looks enticing, right? It's got like a thermostat housing type thing on here. And this is set up for a water heater. A lot of marine water heaters use engine coolant. And that's what these shutoff valves are. So when the installer puts us back on the boat, we got to burp this thing. And that's another thing I should bring up, okay? This is a closed system, right? I'm hoping and praying that the installer burps this thing right. If I start this thing up, okay, in the shop and I top off the antifreeze and everything, when he goes to turn these valves here, you know, depending on where this water heater is, it might be up in the bow, it might be in the stern someplace. I might have, you know, another 2, maybe 3 or 4 gallons of coolant. And now if somebody doesn't sea trial this boat correctly, guess what could happen to my fresh engine? Guess who gets the phone call, right? That's why the sea trial is so important. You know, I know we get in a hurry. The customers are on our butt. They want to go boating. It's the weekend. I get it. You paid the dock. You paid the storage fee. You want to rock and roll, but you got to slow down. You got to slow down because stuff like this, trust me, I've been to boats and the stuff's not burped and the thing's overheating. The temperature gauge is at 220 where this guy wants to go boating, you know, so just slow down a little bit. Okay. We'll jump to the LY6, right? 07 to 11 Crusader, PCM and Inmar. Again, I said this earlier. Mercury Marine never marinized LS engines. Okay, it's only Crusader, Volvo, Inmar, Kodiak. There's some others. Okay, Ilmore, I believe. Okay, I'm just throwing some names out there. Full, same thing. It's LY6. So based on what I'm telling you is when you get one of these, when you order parts from your supplier, just tell them you got a LY6 out of a 2008 Chevy pickup, right? The pistons, the rings, the bearings, all that, the gaskets, they're all the same. Okay, and that's one of the things I told our friends at Felpro. So they're going to put all this stuff on engine parts on Driv. Okay, so I told them, I said, listen, I said, I've had these things apart. You know, it's the same thing as a car, so you can go ahead and list the pistons, the rings, or whatever you make, lifters and so forth. Okay, these cams are identical to a Chevy truck. I've had them apart. I've got the numbers off them. They're the absolute same. And obviously, this engine went to the 58X crank trigger and 4X cam, which the rest of the LS series does. Okay, so just the LQ4 had that different setup, right? And it uses VVT. And I'll get to that. Some of the marine manufacturers use VVT, some don't. Okay, the later stuff they do. All right, and just like the MDS engines, they marinize the MDS or the AFM, active fuel management engines. They just don't use it. So yes, it's got those goofy lifters that shut cylinders down. They're used, but they're not being utilized. Okay, this is an L96. This is a very popular engine. Okay, and you see here I put 2024 because I just ordered a pair of these and we're going to install in a 1967 Bertram. All right, and I got pictures coming up, but this L96 is a very popular engine too. All right, I'm not reading all this data to you. You can download the book and get it. And this is one of those engines. I bought two of these here just a little bit ago, and this engine right here is a 2024 L96 engine, and I bolted a ZF63 1.5. I don't expect you to know what that is. It was a bobtail engine. You can see this is a heat exchanger. The thermostat is right here, right? The puke tank's right here. The oil lines, right? Which we'll get in. You know, you've already heard my discussion on oil lines. Didn't really talk about LS yet, but this is a brand new engine. This actually picture was taken yesterday in our shop, so I wanted to add that in there. It's brand new, you know. And why? How do I know it's an L96? I just pull it out of my hat. Well, remember I told you those stickers, right? Now I'm guessing this engine was probably made in 2017 because I don't think L96 is in production right now, but I'm sure that Crusader and Volvo and some of these other companies bought a ton of these engines. Okay, so my guess is that 7 means it was made in 2017. That's a Chris's guess. I don't know that, but I do know L96, and this is on an oil pan sticker. So if I'm an engine builder and I'm the teardown guy, right? I'm paying attention to this because if I'm an engine builder, I know what I'm dealing with right here. That's what I'm dealing with. So that's very important. So that's how I know this is an L96 engine. L83, Volvo Pennant used these. I didn't see these in Crusader. Crusader just did 6.0s to my knowledge, but they called it a Model 300, Model 350. Marine Power used them. 11-to-1 compression, gasoline direct injected. Okay, it's got the high pressure pump on the back. They're using, these are right off the Chevy truck line, right into a boat. Okay, I helped a marina with a diagnosis of a high pressure pump here not too long ago on one of these. Okay, so it's strictly the same as a car. Strictly. L86, right? This happens to be a Marine Power engine. Okay, I put some approximate years on here. I could be right, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty close, I think, on this. But I put the head castings and all that stuff in there, the compression ratios, the cams, all that stuff. So I'm just showing you that these engines have been marinized. Okay. This happens to be a 6.2 L86 that I just recently did for a 2019 Cadillac Escalade. I know this is a Marine class, but I just wanted to show the variable cam timing, and it's got the variable displacement oil pump. If you're familiar with variable displacement oil pumps, you know, no power to that solenoid is full pressure. It's been my experience so far in the engines I've seen that the marine engine manufacturers are not utilizing that. So it is left unplugged. All right. So they're leaving it at max pressure. All right. Just so you know. But that pump is still there. Like I say, they're taking these engines right off the Chevy assembly line and putting them right in the boat, from what it looks like to me. I took this out of a Volvo Pennant service manual. All right. And this talks about the variable valve timing. And again, this is not a diagnostic class, but I just want you to be aware of something. Okay, this thing's got a range of motion of 62 crank degrees. All right, 31 cam degrees, right? So cam degrees is always half a crank degrees. But I'm interested in something, right? Because I could make a mistake maybe, or maybe the engine doesn't run right. So I might have to coach or at least help, you know, the installer. And the reason I say that, well, when I get here, is this VCT device, right? This is the cam phaser, right? It's got a hollow bolt with a spool valve in it, and it directs oil in or out of this thing. This thing is a vane phaser. It's got vanes, okay? And this is that spool valve right there, okay? It's magnetic. There's a magnetic device on the timing cover, and it creates a magnetic field which pulls this in or out, which moves that spool valve, and I can control the amount of cam timing on this thing. All right. And this happens to be a scan tool capture. And these things are always, I hate to use the word always, but to my knowledge, they're always installed at the fully advanced position. Excuse me, they're always running at idle, especially at the fully advanced position. So this thing can advance 7 degrees, and it can retard what, 56 or 7 off the top of my head, but it's got a range of motion of 62. All right. But what I'm interested in here is this engine's idling, right? It's warmed up. I'm at 669 RPM, and it's commanding 7 degrees, and I'm at 6.8. And trust me, when this engine's running, this thing's bouncing around, you know, and it's telling me, hey, Chris, I've got almost 40 pounds of oil pressure. Okay. Again, this is not a diagnostic class, but you know, it's our responsibility something. We got to make sure these oil passages are clean. Maybe we're putting new phasers on. If I've got some kind of drivability problem and maybe I'm getting blamed for something, you know, maybe as an engine builder, I'm asking these questions. Hey, where's the VCT at? Can you give me a scan tool readout? What's going on here? You know, because the problem with variable cam timing stuff is once you take it apart, the diagnosis is done, right? I mean, if this thing is, let's say this thing's lying to me and it says 15 degrees and it's commanded 7 and the check engine light's on, you know, if I tear it apart, just putting parts in my hand, looking at the spool valve, looking at the phaser, right? This is not a diag class, but the diagnosis has to be done before I take it apart. And honestly, when you look in the Volvo Penta book, and Crusader does not really have a book for this, but the Volvo book basically says verify oil pressure. If oil pressure is good, you throw all these parts away. You put phaser in it, you put a magnet in it, you do all that, which I'm not a Swaptronics guy, but like I say, the diagnostics, even from the factory, in my opinion, are very poor. Okay. I just want you to be aware of this. Be aware of this. Okay. This happens to be an L96 engine. Basic same L96 engine here, right? It's got those GDI pistons, big compression. Okay. It's GDI. The fuel injectors are directly in the combustion chamber, right? Gives us higher compression, more power, lower emissions. That's why we're doing it. Okay. And we employ catalyst heating strategies because most of these engines have catalysts. Okay. And we retard the timing ridiculously on cold starts, and we have a different spray pattern to elevate the exhaust temperature to get that cat warmed up. Okay, but that happens to be an LT62 head, all right, off of Volvo Penta that we worked on. I took this right off the GM website. The 19 and up engines, 6.2s are L87s, it looks like. So this is just a basic feature of the L87 6.2 engine, probably found in Escalades and so forth. But I just want you to be aware of that this is out there in marine power, and I believe Volvo Penta is marinizing this engine. Okay, I haven't seen one yet, but that's why I stole this off GM site. And this is, again, when you download this is just all for you. It tells you the power and all that stuff, and some internal specs of that engine. Volvo Penta did the V6. They did the LV3, right? It's model 200, 240, 280. Kodiak did it as well. But they did the LSV or LTV6, as I like to call it, gasoline direct injected. There's some Four Winds boats, some Regals that had these. Basically the same, right? It's got the variable cam timing, but this is a Volvo Penta version. Just want you to be aware that they use the V6. I have not seen Crusader. I've not seen a Crusader. I've not seen it Marine Power. This is strictly a Volvo and a Kodiak thing, to my knowledge. But they're out there in case you see one. In case somebody says, I got a V6 LTLS engine. Like, oh, really? Yeah, they're not lying. We'll jump into cooling systems here. I'm just going to get a rough overview. Raw water, closed cool, what's it mean? Fresh water, you know. So raw basically is whatever comes out of the lake or river or wherever I'm boating, that's what's going through the entire engine. So the entire engine is getting cooled from that same lake or river water, and it's going right out. The biggest advantage is less hose, less clutter, right? There's less stuff on the engine, it's easier to work on, but it's definitely not desirable in salt water, and it's hard on blocks and heads. A lot of iron in that water. I'm going to show you some pictures coming up. Closed is the way to go if you can do it. You know, it adds expense to the engine. Most engines today are closed anyway if you're buying brand new boats or new engines. You know, they run a stable temperature for emissions. You know, like I said, the federal government is really on marine engine people too, just like they're on weed whips and snow throwers and everything, right? So, you know, most boats 2011 and up, IO inboard, have catalytic converters. That's you know, has to have. So obviously desired for saltwater because I have less of that salt touching things. This is just basically a picture. I basically already explained it kind of sort of. The raw pump pulls the water up, goes through the transmission cooler and or oil cooler if it's got it, pushes it through the engine, out the exhaust manifold, out the back door. Okay, not a big deal. A full loop system means the bottom half of the exhaust manifold also has coolant. All right, engine coolant. So anything blue would be lake water, salt water, goes through the heat exchanger, and the heat exchanger dumps into the riser, and then that water dumps out. One thing about marine engines, I always got to have water to the exhaust 24/7, right? Because I have rubber hoses, I have boots. If it's an IO, I have to keep those cool. So as soon as I start that engine up, I better be pumping water pretty quick out the back door. It better be coming, okay? And I can't go into everybody's cooling system in this webinar. It just, and there's too many different engines and everything. I just want to touch on some base things. Okay. But the long story short is a full loop system is half the exhaust manifold circulates antifreeze. And there's a block off plate here that prevents the antifreeze from going out the back door. Okay, so it circulates back around. All right. This is a half loop system. So half loop system basically is the exhaust manifold has all salt water or raw water. Okay. So the heat exchanger circulates through the engine block and then it dumps out into the manifold. Done. Okay. 8.1 Mercuries are like this. Okay. They did not use a full loop system on 8.1 Mercruiser engines. All right. Crusader uses full loop. Volvo Penta uses some full loop, but Mercury did not on the 8.1. Okay. Raw water pumps. All right. A couple things I want to talk about here. These things are rotation specific. So if I index that thing this way, it's gonna pump water one way. If I turn it 180 degrees, it's gonna pump the other way, or it's gonna suck air or blow bubbles in the lake. All right. So this is just my cheat sheet, right? If this impeller is turning this direction, right, it's gonna create suction here, and it's gonna fill these cavities with water and blow it out there, right? Now, if this thing turns the other way, this thing's reversed. This would be the inlet. This would be the outlet. Okay. Well, this Chrysler, nothing's marked, all right? Teardown guide tears the motor down, right? It doesn't say LH out, RH out. I'll show you those coming up on some other engines. So if the teardown guy doesn't do a good job of marking this, and I bolt this thing up and I fire up this engine in the shop, which we're gonna get to, if I fire up this engine in the shop and I got a problem and I'm blowing bubbles, you know, or I could ruin this impeller instantly. And maybe I could do some damage to my fresh engine if I'm screwing around not getting water to it right away, okay? So that's why I gotta pay attention to what's going on here. So I put this in here. If that pulley in front is turning this direction, okay, then that is going to be the inlet, right? If that pulley, if this water pump shaft is turning this direction, that's going to be inlet. It's not marked, okay? But I got a 50-50 shot. If I bolt the pump this way, it might work, and if I put it this way, it might work. So I got to pay attention. It's 50-50 chance, okay? Mercury's a little bit nicer to us, all right? This happens to be an aftermarket cover. This happens to be a Mercruiser. And you can see here, if you can kind of see it, it says LH out, RH out, right? So left hand out, right hand out. And it says LH ROT, left hand rotation means it's going this direction, which is what my arrow is. And that would be the out. This would be the in, that would be the out. Again, I got a 50-50 shot. You know, sometimes the water pump can turn. Other times I have to know which way to put the hoses. Here's a cheat sheet on Crusader, right? If I had a 1992 or older Crusader, I can just look at the water pump, assuming the engine ran and assuming it pumped water, as long as Bobby Bendover's shop hasn't been screwing around and changing stuff, okay? But you see here how the inlet is on the outside of the engine, on the opposite rotation engine, and it's on the inside here. Teardown guys, you know, tearing two engines on, zip, 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 zip. These part numbers are the same. Those are E35 Sherwood pumps, okay? But that's how I know by looking at the engine right away that that one's opposite row, right? So just a tip, you know, because like I say, if I plumb this the wrong way, that hose is the same. But look how this hose walks around to this side, see? And just those pipes. I see this get mixed up, right? Customers do it, marinas do it, new guy, whatever, you know. You guys, if you're starting the engine up in your shop, maybe you can't get it to pump water. You're thinking the water pump's defective. You order a brand new. These water pumps are cheap, by the way. These things are $500, $600, $700 now. They're all brass. This is not free. So you're thinking, oh, that water pump's junk. It pumped before, whatever. You know, all of a sudden you got money invested. You don't know what's going on. So basically, what I'm saying is stop and look at this, because this pump here is not marked. That outlet, and there's no markings like that Mercury one, like that. Not most of these water pumps aren't marked. That's why I'm telling you this. Okay, they expect you to know this. Marine recirc pump, right? This is traditional Chevy style pump, right? And you're thinking, oh, the Marine warehouse, they want almost $200 for this, $180. I can get that at AutoZone for $18.95. That's just a Chevy short water pump or a big block, blah blah blah. Or is it? Well, here's your car pump. Here's your AutoZone advanced freaking whatever pump, right? See how it's got a steel impeller and it's directional. Okay, so if I got an opposite rotation engine, how's that going to help me? It's not. Okay, that's why this is brass and it's bidirectional. The fins are straight up and down in there, so it doesn't matter which way it turns. So you're thinking maybe the Marine place is ripping you off. They're not ripping you off. This is a different pump. It's got brass in it and it's got a bidirectional impeller. It looks the same. The casting number might be the same, but it's not the same. See this lip here? This is common on a lot of engines, okay? And this is a block off plate going to the riser. And this is here to help with condensation. So this thing actually has two jobs. It's got to keep the antifreeze in the exhaust manifold for a full loop system. And when we're running the boat and we shut the boat off, we have obviously we have a temperature change. Well, in a lot of these exhaust hoses and exhaust risers, there's a lot of condensation. Well, this little lip and this dam, as I call it, is meant, right? This happens to be an L29 Crusader engine we did over the winter. But the reason I put this in here, you can see I cleaned this manifold all up, and I got a gasket underneath it, and I got this plate, then another gasket goes in there. So it's gasket, plate, gasket, riser, okay, because this is a closed system. Antifreeze is circulating through this part. This riser part has lake water in it. But anyway, some of these aren't marked, and you would think that would go down, right? I see these routinely screwed up. You know, I'll take an engine apart that somebody's put manifolds or risers on, and you're looking at it and you're going like this, and you're asking your dock neighbor, hey, does this go up? Does that go down? Because you'll see it's not marked. It doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't say up, doesn't say down, doesn't say anything, right? But it goes up. It goes up. Like I say, it's meant to keep water. And believe it or not, the reason that's there is you could have water in the cylinder, which we're getting to, all right? If this is wrong and a guy goes to start his boat after a day of running it or something like that, and it's ripping flywheel teeth off, or it's coming up against itself, hydrolock situation, you know, this is why this plate is there. Okay, it's a dam. It's for that condensation when it comes down that riser to collect and sit around here. All right. Now, 2003 and up Mercruiser, they use a dry joint riser. Now you're going to say, Chris, what the hell is dry joint? Well, it's exactly that. The water doesn't go through here. Okay. So in this style here, I don't have a good picture. I should have took. There's actually casting holes through here. And if I didn't have this plate here, water can come up through here. So the antifreeze or the coolant comes through here, can push right up through here. All right. But anyway, on a dry joint is exactly that. The water is going around the riser. Well, there's a restrictor. And guess what? We have another 50-50 shot, do we not? Okay. Now, Mercury's smart. They have up with an arrow with this dam. Okay, not everybody does this. But you'll see one's got a wide open hole and one's got a restrictor. Okay, that's for raw water cooled. I'm going to get there in a second. So that's use raw water. If I'm closed, they're both blocked off, right? Because I'm keeping the water in, I'm keeping the coolant. I've got a full loop system, right? So I'm keeping antifreeze in the bottom part of the exhaust manifold, and my riser piece is going to have lake water. All right, but I got to know which way this goes in, right? I mean, if I guess wrong, I'm overheating. All right, so here's your cheat sheet, right? So here's a Mercury exhaust manifold, and that restrictor always goes to where the elbow inlet is for water. Okay, this is going to be lake water. The restrictor is here. All right, and this is for a V drive, right, where the manifold's backward. You see where the restrictor is? It's always on the side where the hose is. If I 180 this thing and restrict it, that water is going to dump this way or vice versa, and it's going to overheat. I've already seen this happen, okay? Because again, not all of us have access to serviceman. Not all of us are Mercury dealers, right? The teardown guy tore it down. I know you've heard me say that 11 times, maybe 12, maybe you're going to hit 13, but the whole point is if we don't pay attention to how this is, isn't that a deal breaker, right? Isn't that possibly a phone call? What's going on? Why is my engine overheating? Didn't do it. You guys overhauled it. What'd you guys do? I dropped those exhaust manifolds to get baked and blasted, right? Teardown guy rips it apart, doesn't pay attention. Hey, boss, you think you're going to see that up in there after it gets suntan with exhaust and rust and water? You won't be able to read that, only a new gasket, but it doesn't tell you which way it goes. It doesn't say, there isn't a note in the box that says, hey, Chris, make sure that restrictor goes to the hose. So I hope this stops a problem someday for somebody. Small block Chevy, real common on raw systems. Look at this. Here's where my head gasket might be sealing. See how eroded out this is, right? Raw engines love to eat this. So when you're doing small block Chevy heads, make sure on a raw system, right? A raw system, it's using lake water and especially salt water. It eats up. Well, I see these here where it can't hold a head gasket anymore. Now, I know some of you guys probably fix that and weld this up and all that stuff. In our shop, we throw that away. We put another casting on. But I just want you to be aware of this. When you tear down guy or something like that, before you waste time doing a bunch of cleanup and baking and all this stuff or blasting or whatever, however you do it in your shop, make sure that this area has meat on it. It's very important. Hydrolock, all right? Which one of these is not like the other, right? Well, there's multiple reasons for hydrolock. I'm just going to go over some of them. Okay, that happens to be a set of big block Chevy rods. All right. Look at this manifold. Look how cruddy this happened. This is an old Crusader. Okay. If I could do the bestest job in the whole wide world and do this motor right, did everything right. We did the best valve work. We got the best valve grinding. I got the best engine builder in the world, all this stuff. If my Marina or I don't take this manifold apart, how well do you think this thing's going to cool looking like that? And you can see I snapped that bolt off. But I looked in there and I go, you got to be kidding me. And this is all the time, guys. Some of this stuff's 50 years old, 60 years old, sitting with rust. How would you like to run that? First of all, how'd you like to run that on your fresh motor, right? And it's going to plug up all these holes potentially, because you know what happens when you rattle this stuff around? Now you break it all loose. Now all of a sudden I got problems. Got to take this stuff apart. You got to do it. If the Marina won't do it, you need to do it. Trust me. And the older it is, the more you got to deal with this. These are impeller blades I took out of a Chrysler 318 block, right? I knocked the saw plugs out in the cleaning process, right? Getting ready, and look at that. I'm not counting them. You can count them. But those things are floating around in there, right? When I get done, like I say, let's say I turn that impeller the wrong way and it's not pumping water. I fire this engine up. Now I just blasted a bunch of pieces. You got to go on an excavation. This is CSI Marine right here. I have to go through and find every piece. I have to. And you know how much time that takes? A lot of times you can't find one or two. So what do I do, right? Now I've got a problem maybe on my fresh engine or an engine that's done years ago or something we did the heads on or whatever, that all these chunks are laying in the motor, right? They're stuck in a manifold. They're stuck in a thermostat housing. They're stuck in a hose, stuck in the water pump cavity. That's why I always like to tell our customers, change your water pump before it gets to this. When it gets to this sucks. This is Stevens Marine pressure tester. And this pressure tester, I don't think you can buy anymore. But I just want to go over a couple of things on pressure testing manifolds. All right. And I had these plates for it. I hardly use this anymore because there's too many plates and stuff we got to make. And you see, I got some stuff to test some oil coolers here. I made up some short weather headlines. I got some block offs with soft plugs to cap stuff to pressure test manifolds for hydrolock situations potentially, right? So this is just more of the same, just showing you some close-ups of some adapters and so forth. Those plates, there's a Crusader plate there we made, and there's some other stuff. But I got a better way, in my opinion, on how I deal with this stuff today. All right, this is oil cooler stuff. All right, and this is what I do. You're gonna think this is hillbilly farm boy in Northern Ohio, but I'm telling you what, in my opinion, this is the best way to test these manifolds. You see here, I got the garden hose with a chunk of hose, right, and going right into this manifold. Now, this is a manifold. The customer, actually, this was just 2 weeks ago. Customer shop brought me the set of heads. Oh, Chris, got water in number 7 cylinder, right? What does everybody do? They rip the heads off. That's the worst thing you can do, right? Destructive diagnostics. I hate that. They think the head gasket's bad, blocks cracked, or whatever. Okay, so he rips the heads off. I check the heads. There's nothing wrong with the heads, right? So I said, where's the manifold? Oh, it's got a new riser on it. And you can see this stuff is new. Okay, I don't care. It's new. New means never ever worked, right? So you see it's got a new 8-inch stack here, or excuse me, that's not new. This elbow is new. All right. And I want to test all that. Well, the problem is, how do I pressure test this elbow? I can't, right? This thing has a hole in here casted. I got no way to block that off. This thing could be cracked, right? How am I pressure testing this thing? I'd have to make up 2 plates. I mean, I got hours in this, you know, even if I got a CNC lathe and I can knock this stuff out, it's a bunch of time that I'm not going to get paid for. And as a business owner, right, it's all about billable hours. And I want to be quick and I want to be accurate. That's my goal. So here's my solution. Garden hose into this thing. We turn the garden hose on full blast. We're going to fill this whole thing up with water and see what's going on. And lo and behold, guess what? We got the money shot. And this thing is leaking right in number 7 cylinder, the same cylinder he said was getting water. And you can see I got water pouring out the back like the engine's running, but this should be dry, right? This has got to be dry. This is, you know, it's got to be. So I got a leak. It could be in this manifold. It could be in this closed cooling piece, which I'm not going to talk about, that's plugged off. It could be in this riser, whatever. So now it's time to do a visual inspection, right? I call the customer and said, look, I said, your manifold is definitely the problem. I don't know what part, but we got to take it apart. And this is just a close-up picture. You can see this thing just oozing out water, right? That's the problem, all right? And look, I take it apart and look at this crack in this riser piece. I got a better picture coming up. I can already see it. Remember our 3 best tools. I could have the biggest Snap-on account in the world, but you know what? It's our senses, right? It's our vision, our touch, smell. Those are your 3 best tools. My vision tells me, hey, Chris, I don't need to Magnaflex this, okay? And look how eroded this is, right? Kind of like that cylinder head I showed you earlier in that small block Chevy. Look how rotten this is right here. It's cracked, and that's on that 8-inch stack, right? That 8-inch stack piece is broke. And I just took a little buffer wheel and cleaned it up. You can see it's broke right through there. Okay, just got to rip the heads off the boat for this, right? Gas car mechanic, right? Zip, 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 zip. You know, slow down, slow down. Most of the time, water in the engine is due to water reversion or something like this, a cracked manifold, something like that. Test this stuff first. You know, everybody just seems to rip the heads off all the time, like the head gasket's blown and this is like, stop, you know, do this stuff first. This is that stack piece, okay? And they actually had the wrong gasket in this location. This should have had a 1-hole gasket here because at the end, it's not a full flow situation. We can't talk about everything here in cooling system, but I had this in because I use it, and I'm going to use this in another presentation. But that's supposed to have a 1-hole gasket there. These 2 are supposed to be blocked off to restrict the flow because we have full flow to the very end. And the very end, kind of like that restrictor gasket, that Merc, that little itty bitty hole, that's at the very end of the system.
I was thinking maybe just to respect everybody's time, and this might be a really good spot to stop after you did that pressure testing section on those manifolds, and we'll maybe save this for part 3 that we're doing, that we plan in August. Chris, I mean, again, excellent information. You've put a lot of work into this, and this is all. I mean, I used to work on marine engines. I know Chris and I have talked about this before, and I only wish I could have seen this webinar long before I'd started working on marine engines, because it would have saved me a lot of time, a lot of warranties that, you know, weren't our fault. Just like what Chris mentioned about, you know, you should get all the stuff in. Don't just assume that just because the marina knows what they're doing, they do. So Chris, thank you again. Great information. And like I say, look forward to, we're going to do a part 3, which you'll see a notification come out, and we'll get that out there for everybody. So Chris, thank you again. Very, very well done.
No problem. I hope everybody enjoyed.
Lastly, as always, thank you. If you need to get a hold of us, you can reach anyone at the AERE team by calling 815-526-7600, or you can always shoot myself or Rob an email. Our email addresses are listed there. We are more than happy to field your questions. If we don't have the answer, we will make sure to pass them along to somebody who can help you. So with that, I'm going to let you all go and get on with your day, and we hope you have a great week.